Good evening. Welcome to the study session for March 2nd, 2026. We have 3 items on our agenda tonight. We're going to start out with the 2026 Legislative Forum update. We also have municipal bonds, and then we have our Wadsworth Grant Program coming up. So we will jump right in. Normally, we would start with public comment. I have nobody in house to speak, and I don't believe we have anybody signed up tonight. So we will jump right in with item number 1, our 2026 Legislative Forum. Mr. Goff, do we have a staff presentation?
We don't really. I think we'll just jump right into it. Well, for our new council members, maybe a little bit of background. We do this annually, just kind of in the middle of the session. Is it the middle of the session, Bev? I guess. Let's see. Almost in the middle. Let's do. Just to get an update from both Colorado Municipal League. So Bev is here to help with us answer questions and give us updates. Unfortunately, Majority Leader Duran is stuck down at the Capitol, as well as Senator Danielson. She's stuck in a legislative meeting, so they will not be here this evening. So we just have Bev. Not just.
We amazingly have Bev.
Lucky to have Bev with us. So I think we're just going to turn it over, and you want to give us kind of a highlight of what you think we might be interested in, and then I'm sure we'll have questions. I know a few of our staff, at least the chief, has a couple bills he would like to talk about as well.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, so as Patrick said, Bev Stables, I'm Legislative Advocacy Manager at CML. I could talk for hours about bills before the legislature. I'm going to try and not totally overwhelm you guys, but I'll hit some of the high points and low points. But feel free to just interrupt me with questions as we go through. I cover land use, housing, public health, sustainability, air quality, transportation, and transit. So those are really kind of like the areas that I know by far the most about. But obviously there's a lot of other bills that we're tracking. And if you have more in-depth questions, I may bring them back to our team and I can follow up with you all. So let's just dive right in. In the land use and housing space, there's obviously a lot. I think every year there's a lot. We have a couple CML initiated pieces of legislation that I'm working on in this space. The first one is House Bill 1285. And this has to do with mental health transitional living facilities. So this is a little bit of a niche issue. The city of North Glen ran into a problem. You may remember about 2 years ago, one of these facilities that are run by the Department of Human Services, and they house folks with lower acuity substance use disorder and other behavioral mental health needs that are housed in these facilities, but they're residential facilities. And in the city of North Glen, 2 residents were placed in this facility. It's less than 1,000 feet from a school, and 2 of those folks were registered sex offenders, which violated the city's distance limitation requirements. The city worked out an agreement with CDHS to no longer place registered sex offenders within that 1,000-foot distance for these mental health transitional living facilities. But CDHS wants to sunset that policy. And so what we are hoping to do with House Bill 1285 is just codify that existing practice so that we have predictability and like continuity moving forward. That is sponsored by Representative Goldstein in the House and Senator Mullica in the Senate. Hasn't had a hearing yet, but we're kind of right at the beginning of that process. And I don't really know, and CDHS does not really seem to know whether there are actually other facilities that would be impacted by this or not. I know Wheatridge is not, but that's CML initiated. So just want to have it on your radar. And then another CML initiated bill that I'm working on is Senate Bill 98. This has to do with noise abatement. This is a bit of a wonky one, but you may remember last year there was a Supreme Court case, Hobbs v. City of Salida. And essentially what happened was the city, not just the city of Salida, but a lot of local governments over the last several decades have interpreted state statute to allow local governments to issue these permit exemptions to businesses to exceed the state's noise abatement limits. So think of like, you know, a brewery in town that allows local performers to come and do concerts, things like that. Even like fireworks, those kinds of things could be implicated. And what happened was a resident in Salida ended up suing over one of these permit exemptions. And the case reaches the Colorado Supreme Court, where the court determined that local governments don't have the authority to issue these exemptions. And I think it presents a lot of challenges for local governments to figure out what their authority now is for these types of events. And there's all sorts of community events that would fall under or be implicated by this ruling. So what we're hoping to do with Senate Bill 98 is offer some clarity for local governments and ensure that they can actually offer these permit exemptions to businesses and make sure that you have those kinds of community events and that you have the flexibility. So it would still be up to you to decide what your noise limits are going to be, what the duration of the event, is it a one-time permit, that kind of thing. But just making sure that local governments have that flexibility rather than it being set by the state.
Bev, if I could
Yeah.
just jump onto that one
Sure.
real quick. For the new council members, we do have an outdoor amplified sound permit program here in Wheat Ridge. And we do allow up to 75 decibels, so that's above the state limit. I think there's some disagreement, or I've heard some disagreement if this applies to us as a home rule city or not. Salida is a statutory city, and its Supreme Court case was just about Salida, right? So we're kind of taking a wait and see approach, see what happens with the legislature if they put some more clarification, if we can allow them. We've had occasional outdoor amplified sound permits. They're not always great. We get some neighborhood complaints. I won't go into the details too much on those, but this will impact us definitely. So
Oh, that's great to know, actually.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
making a
put us
little note
down.
myself. Wonderful. Okay, great. Okay, so then we'll just go right to a really fun one that I'm sure many of you have heard about already in the land use space, which is House Bill 1001. This is the Home Act. You may remember last year it was called YIGBY, Yes in God's Backyard. This year it's the Home Act, Housing Opportunities Made Easier. It's the same sponsors as last year, Representative Basenecker in the House and Senators Exum and Gonzalez in the Senate. It has already passed the House and is actually up for hearing this Wednesday. So if anyone's interested in testifying, you know where to find me. But we have a lot of concerns with this. Essentially what it does is allows schools, nonprofits, public housing authorities, and transit agencies to bypass a local government's existing permitting and zoning process in order to develop residential property on land that those entities own. And in our view, because we already have, as local governments, we already have these processes in place. If you owned a plot of land in your school, and that plot of land is in a zone industrial district, but you'd really like to develop it as a residential property, you already have a process available to you to rezone and convert the use of the property. One of our really big concerns with this piece of legislation is that there's not any requirements around affordability. So I think in the sponsor's mind, more housing results in lower costs of housing, but I think when we have these kinds of workarounds to existing processes, we would really like to see some connection to a demonstrated need, like from your housing needs assessment. Doesn't need to be like a statewide AMI or anything like that, but we would like to see something more targeted than just market rate housing going up on these properties. So CMAL is opposed to this. We are going to have a tougher time in the Senate this year than we did last year. We were able to kill it in the Senate last year, but I think it's a bit of a tougher vote count this year. That's a little bit like behind the scenes, but we are really concerned about this. It's up, like I said, in committee on Wednesday. I do expect it to pass, but we'll see what happens on the floor. That could be a different story, and hopefully there's some amendments that we can get that will alleviate some of our concerns. So that's a fun one.
Beth, I have a question for you.
Please.
I remember you mentioning at the conference that
Yeah.
written testimony is something that we can kind of provide in advance. I want to make sure that all my peers know that as well. But can you give us some information about how we can submit that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can follow up also, maybe give you the link so that you can share it with everyone. But there's a couple different ways you can provide testimony. So you can always provide written testimony. I would say it's maybe not as effective for swaying members of the committee, but it is a fantastic way to build the record. So you can submit as much written testimony as you'd like. You can submit all sorts of different documents too. So if there's like other, maps of your like, zone districts or whatever you want that you think would be useful, you can submit those. And then the other types of testimony are oral, but you can do that remotely or in person. And I think those are very effective. But building the record, written testimony is a great way to do that too. So I'll follow up with a link and everyone can use that. You can use that for any piece of legislation that you are interested in testifying on.
Mayor Pro Tem Holting.
Thank you, and thanks in advance for providing that information. Just a reminder for everybody, so the Legislative Committee is working to register official positions on behalf of the city, and that's being done in coordination with our staff. So anyone is free to testify anytime they want on any bill. Just be cognizant, if you haven't checked with the Legislative Committee on the position that we're taking on the bill, you are just testifying on your own behalf. You are not testifying on behalf of the city. And it's really important for that, because otherwise we can send some pretty confusing messages out there. So if you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out to Amanda or myself.
Councilor Wood.
Yeah, can I ask a question on this particular bill? Please. Are there any safeguards or guardrails in there at all about, or any outs, for instance, that says if, that the local government can ensure that infrastructure is present or access or whatever?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are some provisions in the bill related to like some components of infrastructure, specifically like water, wastewater. But I think, as you all know, in our view, infrastructure goes far beyond those types of considerations. If you're thinking about like, do we need to build new roads here? Like, are our schools at capacity? And I think it's just a lot more planning components than the bill really takes into account. And then also, because you're required to use an administrative approval process, you have to use objective criteria, which I think sometimes is not appropriate for a specific development. You're not able to consider impacts that are not like objective criteria. Yeah, of course. And feel free to keep shouting out if you think of stuff later too. That's fine. Okay, so then a couple other in land use. I'll end on a nice one, but there's two pretty concerning ones. One is House Bill 1114. This has to do with minimum lot sizes. So what they are looking to do here is for any local government with a population over 1,000, it's in a metropolitan planning organization, certainly that would be Wheat Ridge, and a lot of local governments along the Front Range, you would be required to allow a minimum lot size of 2,000 square feet in a single family zoned district. So if you wanted to, according to the sponsors, if you wanted to get out of this requirement, you could do away with your single family zoning altogether, which I get is an option, I guess, but that's kind of like the choice that you are presented with in this bill. It's either get rid of all of your single family zoning or allow these lot sizes of 2,000 square feet. There's a couple stipulations in here around you can, if like there's not water and wastewater able to service those lot sizes, then you have a little bit of flexibility, but for the most part, there's very few carve outs here for any needs like on a local level. So this bill has also passed the House and is on its way to the Senate. We have a lot of concerns here. I have been chatting with a lot of our members to get a sense of what the average lot sizes are along the Front Range. They sound like they're closer to 5,000 to 7,000 rather than 2,000. Yeah, I was curious if you. Please.
Yeah, I'd love to understand the intent if we were able to get inside the heads of our sponsors.
It's a scary place, but
It
yes.
is dynamic and scary. Just for context, so we have 4 single-family residential zone districts in Wheat Ridge, R1, and then R1, A, B, and C. And the 4 and the letters distinguish between the size. So our smallest single lot is 5,000 square feet, and our largest single lot is a quarter of an acre, so 12,500 square feet.
Okay.
And I think I sent a message to the legislative committee. We too are opposed.
Okay.
It might go without saying, but.
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
state that for the record.
Yeah, certainly. And it's good to know because I think the intent of the sponsors here is to have like maybe a creative way you could say of increasing density. The sponsors rightfully point out that the cost of land is a huge factor in the cost of housing. But her thought process is if we make these lot sizes much smaller, then you will get, more affordable homes built on them. But it does kind of come back to that concept of if we just build more housing, but we don't put maybe like any guardrails around affordability or housing needs assessments, that we'll just inherently have more affordable housing. And I think that's a premise that we take issue with. So that one ties into another fun one that is coming, has not been introduced yet, but I think there's going to be a lot of conflict between these two. There's going to be a lot splitting bill. Like I said, not introduced yet, so I don't have a bill number for you, but it will be Representative Basenecker who is sponsoring it. And the concept is that you would have to allow lot splitting, excuse me, as a use by right. I believe the smallest size that you'll be allowed to split, not to split into, but the lot itself could be like 1,000 square feet that you would then split as use by right. And I think how minimum lot sizes are going to work with lot splitting is very concerning to us. Because again, I think you're building a significant amount of density in places where you did not plan for that density to occur. And so you just haven't done any planning around capacity for, your infrastructure beyond just water and wastewater, but like just general planning, especially if you are required, as many of our local governments are along the Front Range, to also increase density around transit. So you're kind of looking at like many different levels of required increased density. So we are very concerned with that. Hopefully I'll have more information soon. I expect that to be introduced in the near future. And I don't really see a world where CML doesn't end up opposed to that lot splitting bill as well. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but we are opposed to the minimum lot sizes bill as well. Any questions or thoughts on?
Counselor Wood?
Hit the wrong thing. I understand the concerns, absolutely. But aside from the density, the question I would have, by lot splitting, does that mean not a subdivision process, so therefore not subject to the requirements of subdivision, which again are the guardrails, So I can see the concern.
Yes, correct. So this would be a use by right. There would be no subdivision process that you would go through.
Counselor Ohm?
Thank you. So if you had a ADU, 1,000 square feet on your lot, but they decided that for whatever reason, they have not done a separate water, separate sewer, they're going to the main house, but now they're going to do a lot split. I think that would be concerning, that they don't have their own separate taps, and how does that affect? But yeah, please keep us posted on that one. I have a lot of concerns over that one. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just also say, since I haven't seen the final language on lot splitting, I don't know how they intend to contemplate ADUs, but what we have flagged for them is exactly that. You are layering like minimum lot sizes with lot splitting, with, parking minimum restrictions, with TOCs, like, how do these all work together? And I just don't think that that's been contemplated thoughtfully by the sponsors.
Mayor Pro Tem Holteen?
Quick question, how late in the session can a bill be introduced?
So the latest that a bill can be introduced is 3 days for the end of session, because it takes 3 days for a bill to pass. So it's, It can happen.
First of May-ish.
Yeah. Well, actually, so the last day of session this year will be the 14th, I think, or the 13th.
Longer.
Yeah, they started late this year, so they're ending late, which is deeply unfortunate. But yeah, that would be the latest. But I actually think lot splitting will probably come like in the next couple weeks, timing wise, yeah. Okay, and then I thought I would end on a kind of a nice one in the housing and land use space. This is one we're supporting, House Bill 1202, has to do with strategies to reduce homelessness. And it would allow, it's completely permissive, but it would allow local governments to form special districts and then bring a question to voters to impose a tax whose revenue would go towards varieties of strategies to reduce and prevent homelessness. And the funds would be up to the discretion of the local governments. But even if other local governments near you wanted to form this special district, but you decided you didn't want to, you would not be forced to be a part of it. You wouldn't have to bring a tax question on the ballot, anything like that. But I think anywhere that there are permissive strategies for us to, like, you know, get creative with how we're addressing housing and homelessness, we are very encouraged by. So we're supporting that one.
So do you know that that could be a regional special district, county, or even bigger?
Yes.
Yep, great.
Yep. It could be however many local governments choose to be a part of it. Mhm. Okay. And then I think I will move into public safety. Chief, I'm sure you have lots of questions, so interrupt me at any point. Okay, so Senate Bill 24, this bill is dead, so we don't have to worry about it, but just to, like, you know, toot our own horn, this was a drone bill that would have prevented local governments from regulating drones in their communities. So we had a lot of concerns with this, but thankfully we were able to kill it in committee, so one less thing to worry about. Dang, I should have ended on a high note because it's going to go downhill a little bit here. Okay. So Senate Bill 70 is the flock camera bill. You may have heard it referred to as that. It's also referred to as like the PEEPS Act, whatever. Anyway, lots of acronyms. But we have a lot of concerns with this bill. We started out in an amend. We were really trying to work with the sponsors to get this to a place that was acceptable to us. There's a whole bunch of different provisions in here. Basically, I think our overarching concern is that while we recognize the need for guardrails around this type of technology, we also know that it is a really effective tool for law enforcement for a variety of reasons and uses. So we would like to see it still be a usable tool. There's a lot of really strict data retention limits here, which does make it, I think, difficult to access that data when you need it for an investigation. There's also a warrant requirement that after 24 hours, you have to have a warrant to access location data, which again makes it really difficult and I think is just not how investigations, to our understanding, really work. There's a lot of limits on data sharing. There's also a huge fiscal note, which if you've been following the budget realities this year, a fiscal note is a huge problem for a bill. Before the state this year, they have about $850 million in a deficit that they need to close. So it'll be interesting to see how they work out that fiscal note. But we ended up moving to an oppose on this bill just because we were not getting anywhere with sponsors on a lot of our concerns. So that's the PEEPS Act.
Sure. Thank you. And I'm not sure if you're intending to talk about 1037 as well.
I do have that on here,
So
yeah.
I'll kind of combine my comments for the two, because generally I think they really are sort of an outflow from a reaction to the flock cameras, a reaction to the use of shared data by some of our federal partners or federal friends out there. And anytime there's a knee-jerk reaction, I think it's not really a good reaction. So for us, our chief data analyst, Beth Daniel, who's an SME across the state and does a lot of work, really dug into this and was prepared to go up there and testify if she had to. But it does take away a lot of the databases we use. So to really cut this to the chase, we could still do the same work. It's much like, for those of you who were here when we talked about facial recognition technology. Beth Daniel, our data person, will go through would in the past have to go through 1,000, 10,000 photographs to make an identification. We utilized technology, and now we save time and resources, and we do that with the guardrails that the legislator put on to facial recognition. We were looking, I think, for something along those lines, but this really feels more punitive because either A, there's not a lot of understanding of what we're doing and how we're doing these cases, and the urgency sometimes to get information so that we can start with our leads before our leads start to disappear. You've seen the TV show, 24 Hours. That's a real thing. We have a certain window of opportunity to get things before certain things disappear and establish our direction in our case. So it's going to make it hard, but at the end of the day, we could do all of these things that I think, or most of these things that they're trying to eliminate. I just need 200 more people to do it. So we're trying to leverage technology in the police world. It's what keeps us from coming back and saying we need to add more people. And this, to me, feels like it's really geared towards not necessarily local police misuse of these databases, but misuse from other entities that are tapping into it. That's why we stayed away from Flock until this settled down. We thought, okay, they'll come to some reasonable conclusion, and that doesn't seem to have happened. So we're looking to leverage technology. We're looking to be good stewards of the taxpayer money. We're not looking to violate Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, and all of those things. But it doesn't sound like there's any movement from the sponsors of this bill, and they're dead set on keeping it the way it is, which would really hamstring us. And ultimately, yes, we have a bias towards victims. We want to provide an outcome of justice for the victims. If you watch the Guthrie case, you start to hear elements of how they're tracking, trying to find the information they're getting, either through vehicle locations, phone hits, private historical collection of data. That's all the things that we use. Not necessarily as high a profile cases, but that's how we solve a lot of them. So both of these bills will have an impact on the police department. I always like to say what we can do. This is going backwards to what we will do less of. We will provide less. We will produce less public safety and less outcomes for our victims should this bill pass.
Thank you, Chief. No, I really appreciate that. So I'll just quickly talk about House Bill 1037. I think that you covered a good amount of it, but this is also being referred to as the Fourth Amendment is not for sale act. And again, I think it comes back to what you were saying, Chief, I think the intent of having guardrails around the use of this data is important. I know that there are some anecdotes about abuses of that use of data, and I think we fully support efforts to address those issues, but these go so far beyond those types of guardrails in a way that I think makes it really difficult for them to be workable tools. I also want to mention 1037 creates this private right of action, allowing an injured person to sue for an alleged violation, which I think also is very concerning to us, not just for the use of the technology, but just general expansion of municipal liability. So we're opposed to that one as well. And I should have mentioned that Senate Bill 70 has passed out of Senate committee and is on the floor. We're hoping that we have more success with pushing back on some of these provisions on the floor on Senate Bill 70. And then the last one is a crazy one. Senate Bill 97, decriminalizing adult commercial sexual activity. I'm sure you saw about this in the news. We are opposed to this bill. It essentially legalizes prostitution in the state of Colorado. I think in particular, our efforts to address human trafficking, we just saw a bill last year that put some pretty significant requirements on like background checks for massage parlors so that local governments can crack down on human trafficking. But legalizing prostitution makes it a lot harder for us to do that work. That's a real red flag for a massage parlor if they're advertising prostitution. So if this is legalized, then that's not a way that we could actually, crack down on some of these illicit massage parlors. So I don't think that one is viable, to be honest with you. I do think that it is more of a statement and to, encourage conversation around this issue, but I really don't see this passing the legislature and being signed by the governor. So we're still going to work to make sure that that doesn't happen, since we are opposed, but I don't think that this is a really serious legislative effort, candidly. It's kind of some of the bigger hits in public safety. I don't know if anyone has questions or if you'd like me to.
Could you speak to the massage bill? Is that
Yeah,
still
absolutely.
out
Yes,
there?
yes. Thank you. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, last year there was a bill that was signed into law that put a variety of requirements onto local governments relative to the licensing and regulation of massage parlors in an effort to crack down on these illicit facilities that are engaging in human trafficking. So everyone in a facility has to be background checked, including like a receptionist. Like every single employee has to be background checked. There's also requirements for licensure, like I mentioned, of these facilities. And then what we found was that for local governments that already had programs and ordinances regulating these facilities, the bill actually limited a lot of what those local governments could do. So for example, a facility, a massage parlor that's open 24 hours a day is probably a red flag for illicit activity happening there. But this law doesn't allow local governments to actually place those kinds of like limitations on a 24-hour facility. Also, the cost of regulating these facilities is not cheap for a local government, the ones that have them. And so what local governments were previously doing was charging fees in relation to the licensure so that they could cover their costs. And the bill, now law, put pretty low caps on what you could charge. So you end up not really being able to recoup the costs of that regulation of those facilities. So what we are trying to do is, and I'll get the bill number, actually didn't write it down, but I'll get it in 1 second. But we are working with Representative Ryan Gonzalez in the House and Manny Root now in the House as well to try and roll back the restrictions for local governments. There's not a lot of political appetite to remove the background check requirements, which I know are very expensive. And we're still going to try if we can get that. But we do, at the very least, want to make sure that there's not this ceiling for local governments when they're trying to regulate these facilities. So I'll get that bill number.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is something we've been looking at. If this doesn't pass, we'll have to bring back our ordinance to make some changes to deal with the bill that passed last year. So we're, again, waiting on the session to see what happens. But
I think, and or you can correct me, but one of the provisions in there was that you could only look within the state for historical data on backgrounds and criminal activity. And that's something that we've found when we were sort of, I don't want to say massaging the ordinance, I know that would, when we were trying to look at how we might update the ordinance, we found people from other states that, have sort of hopped around, and they've been practicing illicit activities in other states, and so we flag them, and, that gets passed on for review. We just make a recommendation. But without that, those folks will get through, and we will have somebody who's already got a history of prostitution or some other engagement with human trafficking in another state that opens in Wheat Ridge. And it's a personal issue because for those of you who remember, we took this on, you took this on. Early when I got here, I think we had 37 or 39 massage parlors, which, I mean, I know there's a lot of hardworking people in Wheat Ridge, but I don't know if there's that many that needed a back rub, but we weeded it down to, I think, less than 10 legitimate ones, and my fear is it will go right back, it will go back to where it was, and it's not a great reputation for Wheat Ridge, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. And the bill number was House Bill 1257 on that massage parlor bill. So we're supporting that and really hopeful that we can at least roll back some of those restrictions. And we were opposed to last year's bill that added those restrictions. Okay, I am going to move on to sustainability. So what I really wanted to talk about, and I was hoping that Majority Leader Duran was going to be here to talk about her data center bill, because that's what I wanted to just flag for all of you, is there's two competing data center bills that the legislature is looking at. The first is House Bill 1030. That is the bill that Majority Leader Duran is running. And her bill is really an incentive-based model to try and attract this industry into Colorado. Conversely, there is Senate Bill 102. That is really intended to deter this industry from coming to Colorado. So you have the environmentalists supporting Senate Bill 102. There's a lot of restrictions on a data center that would come here under Senate Bill 102. And then House Bill 1030 is supported by industry and opposed by the environmental folks. So both sides are pretty dug in. We are closely monitoring both of these. I think candidly, our members are not all the way aligned on their thoughts and concerns on data centers. Generally speaking, we're concerned about our ability and capacity, like for all the other types of development that we're working on, specifically with housing. I'm sure you saw, like in Centennial, I think Excel told Centennial that it was going to be, like 4 more years until they were going to have grid capacity to support some of the housing developments that they wanted to see there. So adding these data centers, I think, would have huge implications there, and cross-jurisdictionally, of course, like, what you all choose to do with the data center is going to impact Centennial and vice versa. But we have also heard from our members that if they are interested in these data centers, that they would like some more guidance on, how do you go about permitting and zoning these and what kind of best practices exist. And there's not a huge amount of information out there, just such new development and issues. So I can see a world where these two bills both die, just because both sides seem quite dug in. There's plenty of time in session, so certainly that could change, but it'll be interesting to see how they play out. And like I said, we're just closely monitoring both, so we don't have a position on either one. But always open to hearing what our members' concerns or thoughts are on data centers, just because we're trying to kind of get a pulse on how everyone's feeling about them.
Was that Kevin Ballmer's email? He was asking if we've had
Yes.
issues with Excel?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, and then there's
Yeah,
always
other
something with
things.
Excel. There's a couple other bills that actually address some different issues with Excel too, but yes, yeah, I mean, we're just trying to get a sense, I think, especially around that development component of figuring out how this is going to impact all of the other priorities that you guys are working on there.
And it's definitely been an issue in Wheat Ridge. Lauren can speak to it as well. It's a struggle, some of you know. We've had developments that have been stalled, delayed for quite some time because of Excel capacity issues. So it is somewhat of a concern. And I think, was it Denver, Aurora put a moratorium on them recently?
Denver did.
Denver, so. So I think it's something we'd be concerned about if it's going to pull capacity from other deeds.
Yeah, I think just to give you an example, so we had an issued building permit for a hotel that was constructed on a generator because Excel could not give them the power they promised for over 365 days.
God,
So
okay.
didn't open on time, couldn't install elevators, just got to an extreme hundreds of thousands of dollar check had to be cut.
Okay.
You know, and-
Neighbors have to listen to generators.
Right.
Yep.
What I've been told by Excel is that until recently, maybe a state law a year or two ago, they were not capable of forward planning. And now that they can, they have such a backlog that we would not be one of their first communities that they'd be willing to forward plan with, which is frustrating.
Yeah, no kidding.
So yeah, and I share I mean, we're mired down in so much of the housing and land use law that I have not surfaced to figure out a position on data centers from our zoning standpoint. I think if I had to answer the question today, I'd say it's not explicitly permitted, therefore it's not allowed. It's sort of our go-to position when we're trying to learn new things. But certainly infrastructure, you may know, not all of our utilities are provided by the city, so water, sanitary, and power. We run into capacity issues with all three for a multitude of development types.
Okay. That is actually really helpful to know. And we've heard a lot of the same. I think there's some local governments that have expressed some interest. I've heard them called data center curious. But that's kind of the extent of it. Like I haven't really heard anyone who's like all in, really, really wants these in their municipality necessarily. But there's a lot of demand. And so trying to figure out where everyone falls in that. Okay, that's really helpful. And I might follow up with you on that just to kind of keep you in the loop. Okay. And then I think I will end, well, actually, let me really quickly talk about, accessibility. So House Bill 1130, just passed committee last week. Basically what this bill would require is for any building with a publicly accessible restroom, you would need to install a baby diaper changing station. There's actually layers of requirements here for like how many, bathrooms on each floor and the signage that you would have to install. There was actually a bill that was passed a couple years ago that required these baby diaper changing stations, but in concert with renovations that you were already doing or new construction rather than retrofitting. But House Bill 1130 is retroactive. It would be all of your publicly accessible bathrooms. I actually met with a sponsor this morning because we are in an amend position. We would like to see local governments exempted out because local governments are already in the process of updating these bathrooms with the changing stations as you work through your renovations. But to have all of your buildings in compliance by 2027 is a huge lift. So, of course, there's a fiscal note on this because it applied to the state as well.
They didn't exempt themselves?
Just you wait. You know where this is going. So there was a huge fiscal note because the state and higher ed was going to have to do this too. And of course, this year, if there's a huge fiscal note, really, if there's any fiscal note, you're not getting anywhere. So the state got exempted out and local governments were left in. Which I was told is fine because they will come back next year and put the state back in. So rest assured, everything is going to be great. But I'm still working on this. I actually think that the state still has some concerns here with where they actually might not be exempted out. So wanted you to be aware. I really hope that we can get this one sorted out because I do think that the costs will be huge. There's so many bathrooms that really fall under this. And something I tried to explain to the sponsor is, I think in her mind, she's thinking of like, if you're a higher education institution and you have like some sort of, theater, like those bathrooms are accessible to the public, but like this building is not accessible to the public in the same way. But of course it is. And how it's written, it very much is. So like, all of your bathrooms here would need to be updated accordingly. So anyways, we have a lot of concerns there. And hopefully I will have some good news at some point. But yes, at this point, the state has been exempted out and left us on our own, which is kind of their MO.
Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen had a
Sure,
question.
please.
Oh, I don't have a question.
I want to hear your thoughts on
I have a
feelings,
thought.
too, so yeah.
I voiced this in the CML policy committee meeting recently. So staff pointed out that it's not just a matter of installing, like several of our bathrooms literally wouldn't be able to accommodate it because of the location and how you actually egress and ingress on the bathroom. So we would have to rebuild bathrooms.
Yeah.
So it's not just a matter of simply buying a baby changing station and bolting it on a wall.
Right.
And then myself and several other elected leaders expressed just economic development concerns. I mean, we are a tax revenue-based city, and the impact this would have on the many small businesses directly impacted us as a local government too. So our concerns are not just for our own economic burden, but also it would just tremendously impact the businesses that we partner with. So anyway, lots of concerns about this. It's not a simple bolting something on a wall, so thank you.
Yes, yes. Yeah, 100%. And to be clear, we certainly have and have heard the concerns around impacts to small businesses as well. Even though that's not like part of our official policy statement of how we're lobbying, I think it is a huge concern. So point well taken on that. Any other thoughts or questions before I move on to transportation? Okay, transportation, interestingly enough, I think before we really had a sense of what the budget picture was looking like, seemed like it was going to be more of a focus for the legislature. And then, of course, they don't have any money, so kind of hard to do a lot in transit. But I'll talk about, there's a transit equity bill that Representative Joseph has introduced, and I'll get the bill number. I actually didn't write it down, so it might look like, but I don't see it impacting you all. But now we can talk about Avis. I'm so excited. Okay, so I am going to start with the bad, and then we'll move to the good. There is an Avis proposal that I have not seen language on yet, but Senator Byron Pelton is really interested in like effectively gutting Avis. That was kind of how his feelings were when I talked to him like a month or so ago.
Can you remind everybody what?
Oh,
Avis
I'm
is?
sure. Yes.
They
Yes.
probably
Okay.
remember, but-
Automated vehicle identification systems. So these are speed cameras and red light cameras. I know the city of Wheat Ridge uses these. A lot of local governments use them. Not to be confused with Flock. Totally different uses. Chief can talk about that too. But there was an issue with Kersey, which is in Senator Byron Pelton's district. It is useful technology, these speed cameras and red light cameras, but I think there can also be some confusion around fines and signage and letting folks know that you're about to enter a corridor, things like that. Anyway, so Senator Pelton is interested in putting limitations on Avis. What that looks like, I don't know, because it seems like it has changed as I've talked to him more about it. He has expressed interest in having some sort of fine caps. We have done research to get a sense of what other states that allow this type of technology, the kinds of fines that they allow, and they're actually much higher than what Colorado imposes. So we're hoping if there is a cap that we could make it what other states do and have some parity there, and you would have hopefully the same flexibility that you have now in terms of those fines. But like I said, I don't have language on it yet. I just want you all to be aware that that is a conversation that's happening. And, you know, I think there's an understanding from CDOT as well as CML that there's probably some cleanup in the Avis statute that would be appropriate. But we obviously want to ensure that it's not a gutting of this program and statute. So I'll have more on that, hopefully. But then I'll end on House Bill 1071, which is CML-initiated legislation that the city of Wheat Ridge brought to us and our policy committee and board passed. So if you're not familiar, what 1071 would do is allow local governments to deploy this technology, mainly speed cameras. I don't think you'll be putting red light cameras on your interstate, but allow you to use this technology on your federal interstates that go through your jurisdiction. CDOT can already put these cameras on the federal interstate. They've been very slow to roll this out and deploy it. I think a big part of it is just expense, but they're also a little hesitant to really dive into Avis for reasons that are not totally clear to me. But
Be funded in part through a federal grants to the state, which is dispersed to Colorado State Patrol, and they get money for it. We don't. At some point when the interstate system was created, there was a handshake deal, even though we're required to have more of an actual contract with CDOT. So we go up there and we spend an inordinate, the more I look at it, the more hours I find that we spend. We spend more than the hours, the human resource hours of 2 of our officers a year up there just on accidents. That doesn't include the criminal activities up there, the road rage, the hazmat spills, the hours and hours we spend up there, and the soft costs associated with a PIO, with our legal team, with Mr. Dahl, having to deal with stuff on the interstate. And the big part is, we have really no way, no viable means, because you all know how I-70 runs through Wheat Ridge. It is a curvy road and it is a dangerous road. We have no way to really change the outcome. So we just take it. You know, whatever it comes, we take it. That triple fatal we had, August of '24. That triple fatal is over 900 hours in one accident to reconstruct it, to do all the work that's involved. That doesn't include any of the soft costs, the legal costs, the potential of being sued, and all those things that go with it. So what we said was, if you want to have a bill where CDOT collects the money, then maybe you just give the money to the state patrol and we can go back to patrolling Wheat Ridge. They didn't like that. And we said, well, what is the dynamic that will change on the highway? You haven't suggested you're doing anything up there, and we need a change. So to me, it's very personal. We're spending a lot of taxpayer money. I'm sort of given that mantra of making sure we do that well. But we don't have a way of changing the accidents and the behavior of our drivers on there. And we've done Kersey is an exception. I don't know where they came off with their whole plan, but like in everything else in police work, one bad apple will ruin it for the rest of us. However, this is a good program. We've run it very well in Wheat Ridge. And, you know, we continue to hear from our neighbors. Most of them enjoy the fact that we're doing something about the traffic that they complained about for years. So I'd like to see this get through, but a lot of folks will tell you that, you know, it's just not going to, somewhere along the line, somebody's going to complain and upset the apple cart. But my hope is that we can do better on the highway with the accidents we have up there and the beer trucks that spill over and all the other things. We do have an ability to work on the state roads because that was, you know, not part of the provision. It's just the interstate system. So, and our friends from the state patrol are very much in favor of us getting this opportunity because they don't have the power to deal with the metropolitan area highways that go through. So it's near and dear to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments before we? Councilor Okada.
Thank you, Bev. I just want to make sure I'm understanding a piece of this correctly. Senator Pelton is opposed to certain aspects of Avis in general, it sounds like, and he is specifically proposing new language for 1071. Okay, got it. That's where I'm missing the piece. Okay.
Yeah, totally, and understand the confusion. So separate pieces of legislation, 1071, ours is already obviously introduced. It's through the House, it's in the Senate. Byron Pelton's proposal has not been introduced yet. I've seen no language. I just have heard him talking about it. So what we are hoping to see is cleanup language there. But we are, I think, being very careful to not allow this type of cleanup language, to go into 1071 because it's just not the appropriate place for it to be. So separate legislative efforts.
Got it. So that also likely means that 1071 is looking pretty good. I mean, no one can predict the
Everybody
future.
knock on wood.
Yeah, exactly. No one can predict the future, but okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I could go on and on and on. There's so many more bills that we're tracking and know about, but I didn't want to like completely overwhelm you. So if you have questions of anything that I missed now, or I can hand out my card too for folks that have follow-up. Happy to do that too.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Did you have a bill number for Rep. Joseph's transit
Oh,
equity
yeah,
bill?
the transit equity. Yep, I've got it right here, sorry. Hold on, sorry.
Is it in the most recent State House? I don't see it in there.
It probably is. Well, actually, you know what? It might not be. Hold on.
I can chase it down.
Here we go. I got it. Sorry. House Bill 1269, transit access, 1269.
Thank you. And then this just may be cobwebs on my part, and my little screen, I can't cross-reference older notes.
Okay.
But I remember at the beginning of this session, there were some grumblings around urban renewal reform. And I'm wondering if that has gone anywhere, or if that's something that we should be keeping our urban renewal ears perked for.
Yes and yes, unfortunately. And I will get you that bill number as well. There is a bill, I think it was just introduced like on Wednesday, but it's the one that we have been worried about, that Senator Marchman has introduced, and Loveland. Yeah, essentially there's some history in Loveland, and she feels like, you know, that the URA is taking money from education. But obviously, our view is that there would not be that money for education but for the URA, which is actually part of a Supreme Court decision on it as well, that kind of but for concept. So we are planning to oppose that bill, and I'll get you that number as well. But we are planning to oppose that, and I think have a lot of serious concerns. It's Senate Bill 129. Mitigating impacts of tax increment financing.
Great.
And you could say the impacts are positive, but that's not
Or
how she
having
feels about it.
taxes that we can use to finance things. Okay, yeah, thank you. That would definitely be of high interest to the city. And so that had been in my little tickler to do that. So thanks for letting me know. That's been a bird out in the world, and we hope it doesn't get far.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'm going to make a note for Elizabeth Haskell in our office to follow up, because she is working on the coalition of organizations that have concerns and are opposed. Our understanding is that the county organization, CCI, is not in support of this. I think it's a very specific local issue that she is using statewide legislation to attempt to address, which they never do. 129. Yep.
Any other questions or concerns, comments? Lots of concerns from this list.
I know, it was a little bit of a downer, but
So I know there's several cities that are already suing the state based on previous legislation. I'm specifically looking at the Home Act and things like that. If that passes and the governor signs it, that's kind of our only recourse, right, is to file a lawsuit.
so certainly not giving legal advice.
Sure.
Just put that right out there. First of all, I will say I am very hopeful that whoever our next governor is has a less combative relationship with local governments than our current governor does. So I sincerely hope that our next governor rescinds those executive orders threatening local governments with loss of funding for noncompliance. But, you know, yeah, what's already been enacted, I don't see becoming unenacted. But I also think you have the path of pursuing litigation now, and especially if you've lost funding, then there's some standing there. But also, I think there's an avenue of the opposite, where you wait to see if litigation reaches you.
Can I ask a quick
Yep,
question?
Director Big
The
Line.
sort of package of land use and housing bills have very much been subject to the executive orders, and we have played the game so far and have reaped some of the benefits with recent grant awards. Is it your sense that the bills in this session related to housing and land use would sort of get lumped into that, essentially raising the bar to stay in compliance, to maintain competitive for funding?
If I had to guess, I would say
Okay.
definitely.
Yes, all right, thank you.
Yes, something to look forward to.
Anybody else? Well, Bev, thank you for being here today
Yeah,
and
thank you for
scaring
having me.
everybody.
I know, I'm
and-
sorry, I'm sorry. It's, yeah, there are good things. It's just, you probably need to know about the bad things more.
Well, thank you very much. We
yeah,
appreciate it. And thank
thank
you for CML for everything that you guys do. You guys do a
Yeah,
great job.
Thank you so much.
We will move on to agenda item number 2, which is our municipal bonds discussion. I know we have some guests here for that as well.
We do. Thank you, Mayor. Let us just get set up here real quick. Do you pass these numbers? And two packets for everybody. I'll take one too, though. Hi, how are you? Good. Welcome. Welcome.
Just make sure it's green and you're good to go.
Yeah, pretty close, pretty close, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Yeah. Unless you want to, you have questions about bonds? Yeah? More than welcome to stay, but you're dismissed, Chief. Go up on the interstate and write some tickets. Yeah. Okay, ready, Mayor? You ready? You know, we have a new Madam Clerk back here. Yeah, thank you, Mary Ann, for helping out. We are here this evening just to really give you a little bit of education and summary and background of the city's municipal bond programs. And so we're not looking for any direction this evening. This is kind of a primer for our retreat, or what we're calling it a workshop, I think. I've changed the name. It's a workshop, not a retreat, April 11th, where we're going to be looking at all kinds of different types of revenue sources and our capital projects that are unfunded and how we're going to fund those over the next decade or so. So I have representatives from Piper Sandler here this evening. They are the city's underwriter currently. They worked on two of our bonds for us, which we will talk about tonight. So I'll just introduce them now. Robin Moore. You may have remembered Nate Eckloff. He came previously. When it was his last day, February 28th? Friday. So Nate is gone and retired. So he was going to come tonight, but
He's,
he
Yes.
probably would have.
Yes.
He loves us. So, and then Andrew Ma, who you've seen before, he's been working with us on our bonds. But they have a presentation. I have one first to start. We try not to duplicate each other too much, but we just want to go through this real quick here. So, working? Oh, I turned it off. Got to turn it on. There we go. All right. So, I think most of you are familiar with bonds and what they are, right? It's really, as the title says here, a strategic stewardship of public infrastructure. It allows us as a city to finance major capital projects or community investments that exceed our annual operating budget. Wheat Ridge used to be a pay-as-you-go city for many, many years, but you fall behind on a lot of projects if you do that. Some key advantages for Wheat Ridge of using bonds: it spreads out the cost of those projects over a generation, basically. So it's not the people living in Wheat Ridge today that are paying for large capital projects. It's spread out over many years. It helps us, again, address critical aging infrastructure needs and spread that money out, spread that cost out over many years, so it's not impacting the annual budget. You can really be strategic and when you issue the bonds and hopefully get a very favorable interest rate, and I think we've been fairly lucky. I think Andrew and Robin can speak to that when they do their presentation. And bonds do support economic growth in your community. We provide the public infrastructure that's required for economic growth, and we have examples of that as well. So we delivered on our 2016 voter mandate. Voters approved a ballot question. We called it the Investing for the Future bond. That was authorized by voters in 2016 via a temporary half-cent sales and use tax. That's on top of the city's current 3% sales tax, which is undesignated. It's used for the general fund. The half cent has to be used for these projects and to pay these bonds. Those bonds were issued in May of 2017, just over 30 million. And those were paid off with an advanced refund. There's so many terminology, you guys can get into it later, but there's different terminology for that, but we basically paid off those 2E bonds in 2024 when we issued the 2J bonds. But you can see up on the screen here, there was 4 major projects for that bond. The modernization of Anderson Park, the Wadsworth project, some infrastructure out at the Clear Creek Crossing development, and then some infrastructure up at the G-Line station. So, after the 2E bonds those projects were coming to completion, we built on that success, that 2E success, and we went back to the voters and asked them to extend that, have temporary sales tax for another 20 years. That was approved in November of 23 with 70% support of our residents, so we were very happy about that. We did issue the bonds for that bond issuance in October of 2024. We did wait a bit, almost 10 months, I guess, to make sure that we had, again, a favorable interest rate. And the interest rate on our current 2J bonds is 5%. And as you all know, we talked about this a little bit at the last council meeting with the sidewalk gaps. This bond is used for focused areas, several focus areas, mainly multimodal transportation, including sidewalk and sidewalk gaps, critical corridor upgrades such as 38th Avenue, sidewalk expansions where there is no sidewalks, and then also some emergency stormwater repairs. This sales tax ballot question authorized, again, extension of the half-cent sales tax, but also bonding up to 75 million. And we've done one tranche so far in 2024 of just, again, 34.8 million. So we have about 40 million left of capacity, which we are looking probably to issue sometime next year. And we're working with Andrew and his team on the timing of that. And then the other bonds that are currently active are from the city's urban renewal authority. They utilize tax increment revenue bonds. The urban renewal authority does not fall under the same requirements as the city, so they do not have to go to the vote for this. And they just issued these bonds on their own. And these are associated with one of the urban renewal areas in the city, what we call the I-70 Kipling corridor. So it's basically almost the whole Kipling corridor that kind of jets out a little bit. It does include the Gold's Market, goes up to I-70, and then wraps around to the Clear Creek Crossing development and the Applewood Shopping Center and everything north up at the Gold Line. So that's the I-70 Kipling urban renewal area. So these bonds are being paid back by property tax increment that is being generated in that urban renewal area from new development. So they issued in 2021 $42 million in bonds at a 4% interest rate. And you can see up here on the slide, these are some of the projects that it's funding. The Gold's Marketplace provided some public infrastructure funding there to make that development happen. The Weavers Recreation Center had a lot of upgrades, the roof, the parking lot, a lot of other long-term maintenance issues. Clear Creek Crossing developments received some of this funding. The American Motel site is receiving almost $9 million of this funding to help with the demolition of the old American Motel and some of the public infrastructure that is required there. 32nd Avenue bike lanes, and then all the Youngfield corridor infrastructure improvements that are happening right now. If you've been out there, we're trying to beautify that area on the Youngfield corridor between the off-ramp, Youngfield off-ramp all the way up to 40th Avenue. So there's quite a few other small things that this bond is also taking care of, but if you have questions, we can talk about that a little bit more. So our bonds, we really are in a manageable situation right now. Our debt is structured. The URA bonds that I mentioned that were issued in 2021, their final maturity is in 2040. The total remaining outstanding balance with interest is just over 55 million. The final maturity, as I mentioned, is 2040. The City Series 2024 bonds, or the 2J bonds, again, those outstanding principal and interest is just over 47 million, and the final maturity on those are 2043. I think Andrew is going to go over this slide. I stole the slide from his presentation, but I'll go over it quickly and he can speak to it. The reason we've been getting decent interest rates is because of our rating. We are a AA-, which you can see it's in the high grade on the S&P rating. So that is the reason we've earned that is because of our favorable local economics and demographics in Wheat Ridge, and we've demonstrated fiscal responsibility and long-range planning. And the city councils over the years have put in financial policies such as reserves, balances, minimum reserves, and investment policies, which all help with this rating. So that's been very helpful. It translates to lower borrowing costs for our taxpayers. And as I mentioned, moving forward in the future, our 2J bond capacity, we have about 40 million left, and we are looking at potentially issuing those bonds sometime in 27. We're working very closely with Piper Sandler on that, and we'll be back to council in the future to talk about that in more detail. This may be a little bit hard to see, but there's obviously legal limitations and some frameworks that we have in place that dictate how our bonds are issued, and they must align with these different criteria. First, we want to make sure that our revenue sources are stable, sales and property tax, taxpayer impact. The bonds, as I mentioned, most of them have to go to the voters. So we have to determine if it's the right time to take another tax increase to the voters or bond issuance or bond authority. And then also just strategic alignment. Are the bonds aligning with what are our long-term operational impacts and what's in our capital improvement program? Our city charter does limit our total bonding capacity to 3% of the actual valuation of taxable property in Wheat Ridge. And that equals about 282 million for Wheat Ridge right now. So we're well under that. We're at 75 million. The URA bonds do not go towards that max. So we're well below our total bonding capacity. And last slide before I turn it over to Andrew. So we promised, we delivered with our 2E bonds, successfully revitalized the park and corridors and economic centers. Our debt currently with both our 2J and URA bonds are structured and fully planned out through our long-term financial picture. And our AA- credit rating is really favoring our interest rates, which is helpful. So as I mentioned, we will come back to you, and when we need to issue the remaining capacity of our 2J bonds, we'll work with Piper Sandler in the meantime, and hopefully, as you all know, interest rates are decreasing, but you guys can speak to that on what that looks like, maybe. And we'll go from there. So, Andrew, you ready? I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for City Council for having us today. My name's Andrew Ma, as Patrick said, and I've been with Piper Sandler for a little over 5 years now. I worked with Nate on the last Series 2024 sales and use tax revenue bonds, so had a part to play in the issuance process for those important projects. And I didn't get the chance to work with him on the URA bonds, but definitely have a good understanding of that as we kind of go through the city's outstanding debt. And I'm joined today by Robin Moore, and she's providing oversight on our services to the city, and she's actually the head of our department at Piper Sandler. There we go. So Patrick kind of went over a good snapshot of the city's outstanding debt issuances. So, we like to think of it as the city having two issuances, one on the city side, which are those sales and use tax revenue bonds, and one on the URA side, and those are the tax increment revenue bonds from 2021. And you can see we've laid out the outstanding par amounts and final maturity similar to what Patrick showed. On the bottom here, we show two charts kind of demonstrating the repayment schedule broken out between principal and interest. And as you would see on, for example, like a mortgage or an auto loan or something of that nature, you start with paying more interest than principal. And as you make your way through the life of the loan, that changes and you start paying more principal than interest. So we're still in the relatively young stages of these financings where most of the payments being made today are interest, but that will convert to principal over time. So one of the reasons that Patrick brought us here today is to talk a little bit about the financing options available to the city. And, we've seen over the past few years, especially, and during COVID, project costs get significantly more expensive. And, many Colorado municipalities that we work with that were originally pay-as-you-go issuers have started looking at more tools in their arsenal to fund their more expensive capital projects. So in addition to cash, there are other resources available to you here, and we focus on three debt instruments that are the most commonly used for Colorado municipalities. And I've ordered these three, starting with the most popular, which are certificates of participation, or COPs, to the second most popular, sales and use tax revenue bonds, which is what was authorized as part of 2J in 2023, and then general obligation bonds last. So I'll walk through each of these from a high level, and COPs first are the most popular for Colorado municipalities, and that's primarily because they do not require any sort of bond election or authorization from the voter base. Now, that is not without certain drawbacks. For example, they typically don't have the lowest interest rate among all the financing options available. But the benefit and the flexibility afforded to the city by not necessarily having to go to its voters to get capital project funding is a huge positive, and that's the reason it's so popular for our entities here. The second most popular, sales and use tax revenue bonds, are what the city has currently outstanding from 2024 and still has authorization from 2J. As you probably know, these type of bonds require a bond election, so authorization from the voters. And as described in their name, they're repaid from a specific revenue stream of sales and use taxes that is defined at the ballot. These are generally more popular than general obligation bonds because property taxes are not very popular in Colorado, and sales and use taxes are much easier to get voter approval for. And lastly, general obligation bonds. These are very uncommon for Colorado municipalities because most of them do not want to go to the voters with a property tax increase, as the likelihood of those types of ballots passing are very low. I would say we really only see those within the city and county of Denver. They issue a significant amount of GO bonds, but it's really not seen outside of Denver. So once you've identified a financing tool for a specific project in mind, we are thoughtful of how those bonds or maybe COPs are going to be repaid. As I mentioned, sales and use tax revenue bonds are repaid from a specific pledge of sales taxes, and general obligation bonds are repaid from a specific pledge of property taxes. Another way that certificates of participation provide flexibility, beyond just the fact that you do not have to go to the voters to get approval to issue COPs, is that you can also choose to repay them from any revenue stream of your choosing. Any legal revenue stream of your choosing. So this is typically sales taxes. We see that quite a lot. That's very popular for municipalities and counties. If you have an existing property tax revenue stream, that's also an option. Or you can do a combination of those things. Or if you have other sorts of taxes, a lot of mountain communities have lodging taxes, things like that. That can be pooled together to repay the COPs. So one of the most popular or increasingly popular financing plans today is to go to the voters with a sales tax increase, no debt, just a sales tax increase. And then if they approve it, then use those revenues and issue COPs. The COPs do not need voter approval. And then use that revenue stream to repay those COPs over the life of that debt. And we have a couple examples on the next slide. But before I get there, any questions?
This may be a little non sequitur, but why in Denver are general obligation bonds viable when they're not viable in other communities in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of it, in our opinion, has to do with the voter base. Most communities are very averse to property tax increases, but I think that's not necessarily the trend in Denver. And we also see that with Denver Public Schools, and they pass their GO bond elections very easily as well with significant voter approval. So I would say the primary reason is the voter base.
We see there's school districts in Colorado use general obligation bonds. So we see that all across the state. From municipalities tend to look at other options because they have other options. Schools usually just don't have anything else available. So most of the schools are using general obligation bonds. They'll go to the voters and get those approved. And we're used to seeing that for school districts.
Yeah, and that's also not to say that Denver doesn't leverage these other instruments as well, because they do also issue a significant amount of COPs and sales tax revenue bonds. So moving on to the next slide here. This table at the top is a sort of summary of the different features associated with the 3 debt instruments that we went over. We try to make each feature a positive, so ideally the more check marks, the better. Notably, COPs do not require a bond election, as we discussed. They're payable from any legally available revenues, as we discussed. And then some pros for sales tax revenue bonds. It does not require collateral, which is a part of COP financings. And then for general obligation bonds, they also do not require collateral. And they have typically carry the lowest borrowing cost of these types of instruments. So as I alluded to before, an increasingly popular strategy is to elect a sales tax revenue stream and then use that revenue stream to issue certificates of participation. And so we have 2 examples here. The first one is for Larimer County. So we helped them underwrite a sizable COP issuance, $110 million, towards the end of last year. And this actually extends all the way back to 1999, when they elected a 0.15% sales and use tax for their fairgrounds. Folks may know it as the Ranch and Blue Arena, where the Colorado Eagles play. So that tax was begun in 1999, and it was extended in 2017. And that tax will sunset in 2039. So what we helped the county look at was issuing COPs and using that specific revenue stream to repay the debt. And in doing so, we structure and size the debt in accordance with the revenue stream. So the COPs will mature, or their term will end in 2039, which lines up with the commencement of that sales tax unless the county chooses to extend it further. Another example we have here is for the city of Fort Morgan, so a Colorado municipality specifically. We helped them pass a 1.25% sales and use tax last year, and that's to fund the construction and operation of a new indoor aquatic facility. They have an existing facility, but it's very old, and it would cost far more in maintenance every year at this point than to simply reconstruct or construct a new facility. So using this revenue stream, we are helping them or planning to issue about $32 million of COPs to fund the new indoor aquatic facility. The term of these COPs is 30 years long, and what's written into the ballot question is that the sales and use tax that was elected will step down to a lesser rate once those COPs mature. So this is a strategy to make the tax itself more electable to the voters. So you're already benefiting once because you don't need to put any sort of debt on the ballot. And they're using more strategies for the sales tax question, specifically saying that the rate will reduce to a lower rate after 30 years once the COPs are paid off. And that also helps make the tax more electable. And we saw very strong support from the community for this sales tax. Any questions on these examples or any comparison between the debt instruments?
Just for clarity, you said COPs do not necessarily need to go to the vote of the people, but if they are backed by a sales and use tax, does that component need to go onto the ballot?
So the sales tax does need to go on the ballot if it's a new sales tax that you're electing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you
So
for clarifying.
the difference in structure is when you have a general obligation bond or a sales tax bond, you're promising investors that you're going to repay that debt every single year for 20 years or 30 years. So that's a multi-fiscal year obligation as Tabor defines it, and that requires the vote. With a COP, it's almost like a lease purchase structure, and it's what we call annually appropriating. So every year in your budget, there's a line item only for that year's expenditure, the debt service payment. But you're borrowing, in essence, you're borrowing for 20 years, but you're really only legally obligated for a year. The legal opportunity is to pay 1 year, then pay another, and then say, "Up, we're out." No one does that. You will not do that. But that's the legal structure that gets you the annual appropriation aspect, which under Tabor then lets you issue or borrow money essentially long-term without going to the voter. So that's sort of the legal nuance. The other difference, as Andrew said, is with a bond, you just borrow money and you repay it. Because there's this annual appropriation, you are also telling investors, okay, we're going to borrow this, we're going to only guarantee 1 year. So if we don't pay, you get an asset back. You get City Hall or you get a police station. So you have to actually pledge collateral in addition to your revenue pledge that Andrew had been talking about.
Yeah, and the COP payments to investors are almost like rent. You know, you're entering into a lease agreement with, call it your landlord or the investor, and if you don't pay, then they have access to your collateral or property. And really what makes the COP not required to be authorized by the voters is the fact that it's annually appropriating, so it's not considered a multiple fiscal year obligation under Tabor. And you're not pledging to repay it with a specific revenue stream. You can intend to say, I have this sales tax revenue stream and I'm going to use it to repay the COPs, but you're not legally obligated to.
Like some cities have done in the past. City of Sheridan, Colorado.
Yes, that was the classic.
Yeah.
Everyone still refers to it. Yes. Messed us all up for a while.
Councilor Martell.
Thank you. So with that example, or can you give us an example of what that collateral actually is? Like, would it be our city hall or?
Rec center.
Yeah.
Or we would actually list a building on
Correct.
the document? We would
Correct.
just pick a building.
And you know, what the investors and rating agencies will look for is that the city provides collateral of approximately equivalent value to the amount being borrowed. So if you went for 40 million of COPs, then they would look for about an asset or, you know, a building worth $40 million as collateral. And so you can, you know, one thing that's most commonly done is, you know, if I want to issue COPs to build a new city hall, I can use the new city hall, even though it hasn't been constructed yet, as the collateral. because once you finish construction after, 1, 2, 3 years, it will be worth the amount that you borrowed for.
And these investors and rating agencies that Andrew's referring to, they love to see that the assets are essential to your operation. So the most essential, City Hall, they love police, fire. Our job is to make the argument that other collateral that you might want to pledge is essential. So we did a COP last year in Vale, and they actually pledged their golf course, which arguably it's right in the middle of town and essential to them. They assess how essential it is and actually assign a rating in part based on that essentiality element. So there's a little bit of a nuance, but the reality is, some cities have all their collateral pledged to other transactions, and so it's a little bit of what you have left or what you have available that's not already encumbered to something else.
Councilor Okada had a question.
Thank you. I'm trying my best to keep up because I'm learning as we're going through this that I'm learning how much I didn't know, and I'm trying to deconstruct my assumptions at the same time as I'm trying to build proper ones. So in the example in Fort Morgan, the tax rate that city passed, 1.25%. It says down at the bottom that it would be stepped down to 1% for continuing the operations. Was that all a part of what the voters voted on, or was just the 1.25? what the voters
Correct.
voted
So the 1.25% and the language stating that after the COPs mature, the rate will step down to 1%. That was all included in the ballot language.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
The need for collateral in the COP process, a gap in my mind is why would that process have a separate need for the collateral piece to it? I don't know if this question's eloquent or not, but is there a reason why that process has that and the other processes do not? It seems like there's a trade-off that I'm missing.
Yeah, so under the other bonds, the sales tax bonds, the general obligation bonds, for a lot of utilities in some cities that have enterprise funds, so like utility bonds, under your legal indenture or resolution, you're pledging revenue. You're pledging to investors that you're going to make these payments. If you don't make it, that's an event of default, and then all the things happen. Under a COP, because you legally actually don't have to make that next year's payment, investors they need something else. They need more than just a hope that you'll go back, and because these are essentially long-term obligations. So a lot of COPs are 30 years. We had that Vale example, that was a 40-year COP. There's a lot of council turnover and a lot of political will that's changing. And so they need to know that if in year 27, you don't make your payment, that there's another form of recourse because it's not technically an event of default because you don't have to make that payment legally. So they want something else. They want something to basically force you to make that payment. But it's a balancing act because if you force it too much, then it looks like a bond, and then our bond attorneys, then they have other troubles. But investors need to know that if you walk away, which you are legally obligated to do, and it's not triggering any default events, that they get some other form of recourse.
Got
So
it.
it's kind of like your house mortgage, right? I mean, if you don't pay it, they get your house back because they want some other form of certainty that they're going to somehow be made whole or close to whole. So it's sort of the same concept, whereas a bond is really just you're making the payments, and the assessment that an investor is making is on your financial viability. So how much revenue have you had in your general fund, or how much sales tax had you had coming in, and they make that assessment over what they think is going to be the life of the bond issue.
And that is the exact trade-off that you were describing, that COPs don't require a bond election, which is fantastic for some communities. But the legal way to achieve that is to have a collateralized financing.
That makes sense. Thank you both. That drove it home for me. Thank you.
Councilor Martell.
Thank you, and kind of leveraging what Councilmember Okada said, I'm learning this too as we go. Your examples, and in your presentation, you talk about the COPs being 30-year, but then you mentioned that the one in Vail was 40. Is 30 the average, or
So
is that what's normal?
Yeah, 30 years is by far the most normal, most common, most popular. for Colorado municipalities. And a lot of that comes from what your expectation for the useful life of the asset you're financing is. So you don't necessarily want to collateralize an asset with a 40-year financing when it's only going to have value for 20 or 30 years. So Vail, I would say, is really more of an anomaly in that we structured 40-year COPs because they needed that in order to accomplish the project.
I would say 20 to
Thank
30.
you. 20 to 30?
Yeah, it's kind of a sweet spot.
City manager.
Yeah, just real quick, we talk about COPs, you may think, oh, that's easy, we don't have to go to the vote, right? We can just put up the rec center's collateral. But just keep in mind, you still have to have a revenue source to pay the annual debt, right? If we can't fit it into our general fund budget, today's general fund revenues, we probably are gonna have to go to the vote to ask for more revenues. So it's not necessarily as easy as you think. We could maybe look at a small COP and maybe we could fit it into our current revenue sources. We'd have to analyze that.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we see in these examples where the issuer or municipality is electing a new tax and intending to use that to repay the COPs, because similarly, they don't have capacity in their current general fund situation to just issue COPs without a new revenue stream. All right, so moving on to a little bit of discussion on the city's credit rating. This kind of is backtracking from, how do we get the best interest rate for you as your bond underwriter? And that really is a function of two things to us, which is one, the market conditions when you issue the bonds. In a lower interest rate environment, there's probably more demand out there, more demand for Colorado paper, and that results in a lower borrowing cost for you. The other way to achieve a low borrowing cost, or the additional way, is by achieving a really strong credit rating. And the credit rating, like your credit score, is a reflection of your credit worthiness or an assessment of the city's ability to repay the bonds or COPs. So as Patrick mentioned, the city earned a really strong AA- credit rating from S&P on its Series 2024 sales and use tax revenue bonds. And that is towards the top of the spectrum under the high grade category. And that is truly one of the highest credit ratings that can be achieved on a municipal bond financing. And in assigning that, S&P or whichever rating agency is looking at the bonds will evaluate all sorts of criteria. So things from your income levels in Wheat Ridge, your income levels compared to comparable issuers, neighboring issuers, your growth rate, your population growth, things like that help them get a sense of the general economic and demographic sense of the community. And then the other way that they look at the city is the financial aspect. How healthy is your general fund? Do you have a significant amount of reserve levels for a rainy day? So also, kind of financial management practices as well. So are you budgeting conservatively? Are you planning your capital projects, 5-10 years in advance, things like that. So the credit rating is really one metric that's supposed to represent your economic, demographic, financial picture in one kind of system. So that AA- is quite strong, and we would expect that if the city revisited the capital markets or the rating agencies with COPs or sales tax revenue bonds again, or general obligation bonds, that we would land at or close to a AA- rating as well.
Mayor Pro Tem Milton.
I waited till you took a sip of your water.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, this is really well presented and helpful. So I just thank you, everyone who's worked on this. I think I'm just restating something, but I want to make sure I'm hearing it correctly, and that our city's credit rating ties to a lot of things, including our city management decisions and our policy setting decisions that we do as a council. am I understanding that correctly from what you're
Yes,
saying?
that's 100% correct. And actually, they look for specific things like having policies to establish reserve levels. They always ask, is there a written policy that we can take a look at and evaluate? So I would say that your decisions and management decisions are actually directly reflected in the rating.
Okay, and that's helpful. When you were saying, like planning ahead on capital investments, at first I was like, oh, we don't do that. I was like, we totally do that. And so I'm restating it because it may not be explicit a lot of times when we're having our discussions, but I know Patrick brings that to the table in his thinking, and it's what has enabled us to leverage the tax, the sales tax that we're doing. So I hadn't made that connection before tonight, so thank you.
Yeah, we actually have to sit through an interview with S&P, and they ask us all kinds of questions. They ask some even personal questions, I think. They want my resume, our finance manager's resume, and so they look at a lot of things, yeah. These guys help us with that, though.
Any other questions on the credit rating? So that kind of wraps up our discussion on the different debt instruments available from a relatively high level, and our discussion about the credit rating and what goes into that assessment. So we're going to turn gears here to a little bit of a market update. So this is a snapshot of 30-year taxable, which is the blue line, and tax exempt, which is the orange line, interest rates going back over 10 years. And then the trend is that tax exempt interest rates, as they should, are lower than taxable interest rates for the majority of the time. And Wheat Ridge, as a public issuer, a municipality, issues tax exempt debt and takes advantage of that difference between taxable and tax exempt interest rates. So adding a little bit of context, the URA issuance occurred in, I believe it was mid-2021, and that could not have been a better time to issue the debt because interest rates troughed from 2020 to 2022. Since 2022, we've had a significant number of Federal Reserve rate hikes through 2022 and then into 2023 as well. And we've stayed in about the same range of interest rates since mid-2023. The last issuance, Series 2024, which were those 2J sales and use tax revenue bonds, were issued in October of 2024, which I think reflects well on this graph, and it was a relatively good time to issue the bonds in the context of how rates have looked in the past 3 years. So going on to the next slide, a little bit about our expectation for interest rates going forward. So the market is currently pricing in 2 25 basis point or 0.25% rate cuts through the end of this calendar year. That's the expectation considering all the different political things going on. President Trump wants a lower interest rate environment. There's a lot of geopolitical tension in the Middle East. There's a lot of domestic tension too. So with all those things considered, the market thinks it's most likely that there will be 2 25 basis point rate cuts, which is a good sign for us and a good sign for the city as well if that comes true. So specifically looking at the federal government, the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, some of you might be familiar with, his term is ending in May. He was actually originally nominated by President Trump during his first term, but now he is not as well liked. So President Trump has another nominee in mind. His name is Kevin Warsh to be his successor. And it's expected based on Trump's narrative and him speaking to the press that he's going to want his nominee to really push for a lower interest rate environment. It's good for the economy. It's good for the federal government to push down interest rates, and it looks better for him. So that's what everyone is expecting to occur. taking a more macro look at the economy as a whole, the expectation is, and I think has been for over a year now, that the economy is going to slow down. It's been a very slow slowdown, so we're still waiting for that to kind of ease in, but the expectation still is for the economy to slow down, for unemployment to rise, and when that occurs, we typically see interest rates for both tax-exempt and taxable bonds to go down. And that is because, when the economy is not doing well, the stock market's doing well, investors typically like to have their cash parked in safer investments like bonds or other fixed income. And I believe that is what we have prepared today for you all. So if there are any questions, we are happy to field those.
Councilor Okada.
Thank you. I took a quick peek at our charter to make sure that I'm understanding this, but I just want to erase any doubt in my head. In staff presentation, it mentioned the 3% of the actual valuation of taxable property as being our limit. COPs fall within that because of the bonds or other evidences of indebtedness, I think is the phrase. So I just want to make sure and erase an assumption. Okay, cool. Yep.
So I believe that the COPs are not technically considered indebtedness, so it wouldn't fall under that, but we would want to verify.
Yeah, I
with
think
the
our
attorney.
charter though may, thanks for bringing that up. I think our charter says that we'll send you the language.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
COPs are all, as we mentioned before, they're practically constrained by, as Patrick was saying, your ability to repay them. So while you have the maximum that's legally allowed, there's a practical limit based on how much revenue you have relative to the expenses. So we look at the legal test, but then we look at making sure that you can all sleep at night test, and that investors will get repaid. So there's sort of that two-pronged element, but certainly the legal is where we start.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none. Robin and Andrew, thank you for being here today. We
Thank you so much.
appreciate you.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate
It
you
was
coming.
very informative. Thank you. Are we planning to have them at our workshop?
Not the workshop, but that's why we brought him this evening. Andrew loves us. He made us come anyway, just to hang out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or Nate may show up.
Yeah, Nate may. We'll give our best to Nate as well as you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys.
We will move to item number 3 tonight, which is our Wadsworth Business Grant Program. Mr. Goff, do we have a staff presentation?
We received a request, consensus at the last week's council meeting, right? To bring forward a discussion to talk about potentially standing up a second round of Wadsworth Business Recovery Grant Program. And Councilmember Martell, I think, asked for that, so maybe we want to turn over to her to speak to this.
Sounds good. Councilmember Martell, let's kick it over to you.
Great, thank you very much. So if you remember last week, I asked for support to discuss tonight the possibility of standing up a second round of the Wadsworth Recovery Grant Program. And do I tell
Go
my
ahead.
thoughts at this point, or this is new to me?
Yeah,
Okay,
maybe
thank
if
you.
you want to talk about the process to this
Okay.
point and kind of where we're at. And
So the process to this point is that the initial Wadsworth Recovery Grant Program that was administered or supported by Local Works, but overseen by the Wheat Ridge Business District has been completed, to my understanding. I know businesses have been, distributions were decided upon and businesses were notified, and I believe payments are in progress, if not done. My reason for bringing this up is that in one meeting with the Wheat Ridge Business District Board in reviewing that grant program, I saw a need for and an opportunity for more worthwhile businesses along the Wadsworth corridor to participate in another round of that grant program. And I also saw the work done by Local Works to prepare the program and administer the review and processing of the applications for validity and completeness and eligibility with the program to be top-notch. And I propose that not only do we do a second round, but we give that program in its entirety over to the Local Works to administer and oversee. Thank you.
Do we have any questions or comments on that? Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I appreciate this coming forward and understanding that the initial allotment of $75,000 did not meet the need that was expressed through the program, and that also recognizing several businesses may or may not have heard about it, or that there could be additional needs met through this. So the two things that I guess I just want to, one's a restating. So this would be taking an existing allotment that we already gave to the budget and would just be repurposing it from a general business grant fund to another earmarked portion that would be going to Wadsworth businesses. That's correct. Yes, yeah, okay, yeah.
I believe-
Nods. but-
Yeah, that's
okay.
that's definitely an option. We have 45,000 set aside for the Wheat Ridge Business District Grant Program, their traditional facade grant program, and other. They have a few other categories. We have not distributed that money to them yet, so we could use that for this instead, if you'd like.
So I think that was going to be my second part of my question was if anyone knows if any businesses or any of those grants had been considered or evaluated for distribution under like the general grant program.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen. I can address both of those, and if you guys want to jump in. To your first point, yes, I believe the ask of the first round of grant applications was around $97,000, and it was $75,000 that was allocated, which is great. And also, we weren't able to fund everything, or the board was not able to fund everything. And I do agree that the communication and promotion of that award, of that grant program, was solid, but I think Local Works has a track record of promoting a little bit more, so hopefully that'll also help more businesses being notified. The second question is that as of the last meeting that I did attend, there were no grants in progress, and there hasn't been a meeting since then. So as of now, there've been no considerations brought forward this year.
Great, thanks for answering those questions.
Counselor Ohm?
Thank you, Mayor. The question I have is, how did they, I understand the amount of money, but how did they substantiate, quantify what that specific need was? I'm just wondering, like, was it a loss of revenue? Was it or did they need a certain amount for advertising?
Part of the program was that the business owners put in a proposal, essentially, and they submitted a proposal for what they wanted to do with the money. So whether it be advertising or I believe some of them were to update their stock or whatever it was. So it wasn't a loss of revenue. The idea of this program isn't to look backwards, it was to look forward and make sure that our businesses on Wadsworth now have a springboard to make sure that they're successful now that construction is over. So it's not necessarily to make up for the revenue that they lost, but to make sure that they move forward successfully. Councilor Martell, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I can actually, thank you. I can read some of the criteria from the original program. The original eligibility criteria is as follows. Businesses must be located in a Wadsworth construction impact zone. And I believe that was defined as like 2.2 miles from Wadsworth on this side, on the east-west streets. But the criteria must demonstrate impact from construction, must be in good standing and have active business license in Wheat Ridge. And eligible expenses included strategic business consulting, coaching, SEO and digital marketing, improvements, social media strategy and advertising, updated signage or storefront, enhancements, equipment upgrades that increase efficiency, customer experience investments, interior layout, displays, et cetera, or other business development initiatives with measurable results. And I will say of the applications that I did review, there was definite degrees of businesses that really showed in their financials and in their narrative the impacts and their plans. And some had bids for the things they were looking for. Some businesses showed true impact but didn't have a very clear plan. And some had a lot of ideas and maybe could use more structure on what those plans were. But the criteria that was used definitely looked at 1 through 5 scale based on measurableness and impact from the project.
Counselor Snell.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to add to that, I also saw the applications, and the beauty of this program, I feel like, is that it relied on business owners who know their business better than anyone to really like substantiate the ask. And so other than those criteria, I think that, those criteria were part of that, but it really, there were some applications that really sort of dialed in very much detail, why they needed it for all of those things. And like Councilmember Martell said, there, to differing degrees, there were great answers, lots of data. And then there were some that were more like, we hope to do this. But I think that really what it does is continues to support the idea that those businesses know, the business owners know their business better than anyone. And it kind of gives them the freedom to say how they want to bounce back. So just to add to that, thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Okada.
Thank you, Mayor. Who designed the application criteria?
Paige Piper and I put it together initially and then submitted to council and business district.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess my question is, for the second round, do we anticipate any changes to the criteria or any adjustments? And then part two would be, what are the plans for promoting this idea so we reach as wide an audience as we can?
Thank you, Councilmember Larson. Those are great questions. And in reviewing the applications that I did, I felt like the criteria and purpose of the initial round were very clear, and the way it was designed had very specific ways to evaluate, including the rating system of like 1 through 5 scoring of meeting or exceeding expectations or not meeting expectations. So I do not propose any changes to the criteria or structure of the plan, but I do think that's something we could discuss as council if we would want to, but I feel comfortable with the program the way it was written. And that was by Paige from Local Works and Mayor Stites.
And then the second part of the question about promoting this, making sure as many people as possible hear about it.
Thank you. I forgot about that part. I don't have a plan for that, but I do recommend that in giving the ownership and administration of this program entirely to Local Works. I think they have an excellent communication and marketing plan for their existing programs. So I think it would fall into that Local Works umbrella of their social media, their email communications, and just their community outreach that already exists. That would be my recommendation.
And then just one more point. The one difference, I guess, on this second round would be there would be some overhead costs for Local Works.
That is my understanding,
Yes.
Mr. Goff.
Yeah, and there always has been with these grant funds that we send to Weaver's Business District. They used an outside contract to help administer their grants, and I think they charge 5% admin fee. And Local Works is asking for the same.
I just want to add, I guess, as far as the advertising go, I think the success of the first round would help springboard more excitement from some of those. I think a few of the business owners on Wadsworth were maybe a little bit gun shy about even trying to submit to get into it because they didn't really believe that it was a real thing. So now that some of their neighbors may have collected a check and are moving forward with it, the success kind of springboards a little bit too. Councilor Wood.
This is really less a question and more a comment. having been witness to several construction projects, there's a real need for this kind of funding because businesses do suffer during construction. And I just want to say I commend you for foreseeing the need and finding a way to do this.
Counselor Quinton.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Counselor Martell, for bringing this up. I think this is a good idea, and I'm really for it. I went to a cleaners right there next to Little Caesars because I don't own an iron and wouldn't know how to use it for my shirts. And I talked to the lady that owned the little cleaners there, and she said she had some customers that were probably not going to come back because they couldn't figure out how to get in, yada, yada. So I think this is kind of a good, I'm going to let her know when I pick up my freshly ironed pressed shirts next Friday to let her know about this grant program so she can make application for it. But I think this is a great idea to give another round for those struggling businesses. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem Holteen.
Thank you. I want to go back to the qualifications. I did not hear the geographic qualifications. Would you mind sharing those again?
Sure. I believe it was 2.2 miles.
It was 0.25 miles.
Okay.
So it's a
Okay.
quarter.
That did seem
That would
Yeah,
be all.
Like,
it's
wait a
a
minute.
quarter mile off of
Quarter
Wadsworth,
mile,
so.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Mod Mood,
Yeah,
roughly.
Yeah. Okay, good, because I was like, wait a minute,
Wait a minute.
that's crazy.
Yeah, my apologies for that.
That's okay. I'm gonna just get into like just a little bit of a personal grievance that might come up again during council matters tonight, but if it's possible, I would like to exclude eligibility for A-frame signs to be funded with these. The A-frame signs are like the sandwich board signs that are now populating our beautiful new landscape and squashing our plants when it gets windy and blocking our sidewalks. So I don't know if it's possible to drill down to that, but I think using these funds to add to what I think is visual blight on our beautiful corridor, if they need signage, I think there's other more allowable and appropriate signage investments for them to make. So that is a request, and I guess I'm looking to members who have experience in the process to see if we could disallow that particular use for these funds.
I don't recall seeing a whole lot of, in the plans, A-frame signage sort of thing. I mean, it was a lot more sophisticated, a lot of the plans that we saw for it. So, but yeah, a lot of it was online marketing and that sort of thing. There wasn't a whole lot of little things. It was bigger type things.
What is the minimum grant amount?
With the initial round, the initial grant was 5,000 and the maximum was 10,000.
Okay, and about what was the average grant-ish? Does anyone recall?
Well, the actual payouts ranged from 2,000 to 9,000.
Okay.
So that is another discussion point I think we should address is working with Local Works. And as we move this forward, I would request that they enforce those minimum and maximums unless we as council decide to change them. And even if we change them, enforce what we agree upon.
Okay. Well, I think it's a great program, and I've aired my personal grievance around the sandwich board signs. I think that they're really creating a blight. But I would support otherwise the criteria that's been set forth and really ask that issuance and governance of these dollars on behalf of the city and our taxpayers is done according to the guidance that has been agreed upon. And unless other people have additional thoughts, do we have a consensus to move forward with having Local Works do another round of issuance using the $45,000 that council had allotted?
We do. Okay.
Mayor Stites, can I ask, when we move this forward to Local Works, can we ask for an additional wording in the criteria to say anything outside of the business be secured? Or is that even worth just maybe conversation?
Can we maybe give them our
Thoughts?
thoughts on that?
I think giving the thoughts on that would be helpful. Yeah. And then we'll have other thoughts in other places on it. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments on this matter? Fantastic. Thank you, Councilor Martell, for bringing that up. I think it's definitely going to be a big win for more of our businesses on Wadsworth, so thank you. We will go to our agenda item number 4, staff reports.
Nothing else this evening.
Okay. Elected officials reports. Does anybody have one? Councilor Snell.
I just have a couple things. First of all, I have to thank our amazing admin and IT staff. I had my laptop decided to have as Pink Floyd would say, a momentary lapse of reason at some point this weekend, and so I was completely. I don't like to be this reliant on technology, but I wanted to act like I knew what I was talking about tonight. So my laptop spent the majority of the day here, and they got it completely up and working again. And I'm always in awe of our staff and just how above and beyond they go and how quickly they get to a resolution. And so I just wanted to say a big kudos to IT and admin staff for that. Thank you. And last week, Councilor Martell and I got to go and tour Public Works. Now, I have to admit, I have already toured Public Works, but I really enjoy that tour, and I don't know Director Kisselman very well yet, so I wanted to go again, and they just do so much. I feel like they should have a closet for all the hats that they wear, because they do so much, and it's such a great team, and so I was just really glad to be able to do that again. And then lastly, we have, Councilor Martell and I have our office hours again tomorrow morning at Mountain Milk Coffee. That is from 9 to 11, and that will be our last meeting at Mountain Milk because we're not meeting the second meeting in March. And for April, for the next quarter, we're going to be at Ann's Pie Cafe on 29th. So that's going to be our next meeting spot. So hope to see everyone tomorrow morning. And that's it. Thank you.
Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. We had a District 2 meeting at Stylus and Crate, and we had a record number of people, probably 38, 40 people showed up. We had some really good, it was really good conversations, went over a lot of topics. We were lucky to have Alex Rose from the PD there to answer some questions. One of the things that came up that people really want to be informed of, when there's construction going on, because we're doing some of that on the surveying on Dover. So they want to be notified. They want to be notified when things are happening. And the one thing that we talked a little bit about is, and I've sent some of this to the other council members now, is it'd be great to have a district sign up for text and email, like a specific district. And I think that would be something that our neighboring Lakewood has done. I think that'd be something really good where we could start building up a database and use it district by district, or you could have, if we have something citywide, you could check all 4 boxes. I think that'd be something really beneficial, and that was things that the constituents were asking for. Some wanted phone, signups, and some wanted email signups, and those are something that I'm hopeful that we can get someday. And I know I've had conversations with Patrick in the past, and look forward to someday having that. So thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Holteen.
Thank you. Thank you. We did have a record-breaking and wonderful District 2 meeting, and 2 things out of that I want to recognize. One is, we had a lot of neighbors from Dover who had been in here last Monday, and they brought a lot of good questions. And I just want to recognize when we have these meetings, it's such a great opportunity for us to connect with our constituents. And even though sometimes the topics can be a little tense, or sometimes the neighbors aren't getting along on they're not in agreement on things. I'm always just so impressed with how civil they are. I know Scott and I both got really thoughtful follow-ups for the opportunity to be in the room. And then I also want to recognize, we learned the morning of the meeting that Tad Overstreet at Stylus and Crate had fallen off a ladder and had broken a couple of his vertebrae, is recovering. But he is a beloved community partner. And so send him good thoughts and check in with him, give him a little bit of time. He was well enough to text me, but he'd spent a couple days in the hospital. So I just wanted to send Tad our best. And then, as I previewed earlier, Wadsworth is looking beautiful. And I noticed today they actually were like testing the irrigation system, and we have all this beautiful landscape. And I ride my bike probably twice a day, sometimes more frequently, along both the east and the west side. And I'm noticing, particularly on the west side of Wadsworth, there are probably 6 to 7 of those A-free sandwich signs that had been in the pathway, and then I think there was some enforcement done, and now they're being put in the landscaping strip between the street and the sidewalk for visibility. And when it was windy last week, they were all blown over and were landing on top of our landscaping that is like precious and baby and new. So I don't know if that is an allowable place for those or not. But it's also kind of junking up the corridor. I mean, it doesn't look good, but it's also posing a risk. So it's just putting in a request for some enforcement on that. And if it turns out it's an allowable use, then I would be bringing it back to council for consideration to not allow the A-frame signs in those spaces because, yeah, and they're still putting them in the middle of the sidewalk.
And I don't think they're allowed. I think we were fairly lenient on the businesses on Watts during construction, letting them put banners up and other things, and we probably are going to have to be less lenient now that it's done. So we'll look into it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I wanted to kind of express some of the same leniency, but
Yeah.
now it's, creating like a visual deterrent, but also posing to do some damage to the thing. And those big flaggy things are also getting put in, and then they're falling into Wadsworth when I saw this weekend. So anyway, as someone who is in that environment a lot, some enforcement would be appreciated. And in particular, there's a tattoo parlor whose sign I have relocated no fewer than 20 times. So, all right, that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Martell.
Thank you, Mayor. In addition to the events that Councilmember Snell mentioned that we both were able to participate in last week, I also wanted to mention that last week here in our city chambers, Representative Peterson's office had her office hours. She wasn't here, but they had 3 representatives from her office were here just helping the community with general problems, concerns, questions. And Jenny and I, or Councilmember Snell and I had a table here to answer any Wheat Ridge questions that came up. And we didn't get any Wheat Ridge questions specifically, but we were able to help somebody who came in with a family leave question. And we just kind of put our brains together with him and helped him find a solution. But it was a really neat event to see Representative Peterson's office out helping just community members and to be here for it. And it was just a great experience. And we got to kind of show off our city hall and our chambers for the afternoon. So it was a good experience.
Councilor Wood.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring forward something that I found out about recently at a Regional Air Quality Council meeting. They're sponsoring a program called Accessible Bikes for Community, which are e-bikes, which I know we don't have in Wheat Ridge and don't allow, but they fully pay for this, which is interesting. And it's not like Lime that would be citywide or community-wide. It's development focused on affordable housing communities. So it's something that if it worked and if it was doable, it would benefit those folks who live in affordable housing communities who need a way to get around. Maybe they don't have a car, maybe they can't afford to drive it all the time, and it's environmentally friendly as well. So it seems like it's something worth considering. Now, and the reason I brought it forward here is I don't know where it would be considered. I don't know if the city would consider it, if it would be Foothills Regional Housing that would consider it. Maybe it's a combination of the two, but I thought it was worth passing along the information at least.
Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. And for me, the big news is that I paid off the car loan on my Honda. Also, though, I did see this week, there was an announcement from the governor's office that they have finished up this round of what they're calling the Transit-Oriented Communities Infrastructure Grant Program. And the good news is that Wheat Ridge was included in that for $4.5 million in partnership with Foothills Regional Housing on the Ridge Road and Miller project, where there will be improvements to 3 public roadways to support 200 infill affordable units. And the improvements include sidewalks that connect to the transit hub, landscaping, lighting, utilities, drainage, and pedestrian safety improvements. I think that's that speaks pretty well of the process that we went through to help the folks at Foothills Housing get this $4.5 million grant in place. So I pass along my compliments on that. And then the other thing very quickly to note is that for those of us that drive older cars, if you get an emissions notice when it comes time to renew your license plate, that the fees at Air Care Colorado have gone up by $10. Is the first time or the second time in the 30 years that Air Care Colorado has been operating in Colorado. So be prepared for that when you go to one of the check stations. And then finally, if you've driven by the Old American Hotel, there is progress going on. All of the interiors have been cleared out, all the materials, the asbestos, the stuff that needed to come out. So all that's left right now are the concrete walls. And I imagine it'll be fairly soon that the rest of that building comes down. And I don't think any of us are going to miss it that much. Thanks.
I'm still waiting for my invitation to hit a button or something on that. I don't know when that's going to happen, but when it does, I'm going to be there. Anybody else? All right, seeing nobody else, we will be back here a week from tonight, March 9th. It sounds like we have a pretty full meeting. I believe we have 3 proclamations and a special study session. So get some rest and have a good meal before you guys get here. It is 8:47, and we will adjourn our study session.